Well, happy Sunday, Foothills Church. Good to see all of you. Let me greet those of you listening here in Classic and those who are tuning in from home. We're grateful that you're taking some time out of your morning to be with us and tune in with us as we take another step in our series that we started last week. We made good progress week one in this series that I'm calling The Fruit of Humility. The Fruit of Humility. It really could be a series called How to Have Great Relationships. Because the fruit of humility, the Bible tells us, literally from cover to cover, that it is a virtue that's critical for our relationship with God. In fact, we learned last week that that's where humility starts. A daily dependence on God. A daily dependence on God, which when I say that, what I'm picturing, what I'm imagining is a posture of heart and a kind of ongoing mindfulness that God is your source for everything. A posture of heart and an ongoing mindfulness that God is the source of everything in your life. This is what we looked at last week. God took the Israelites through the desert, and he said, I brought you to the end of yourselves. I brought you to your limits. Over and over again, I brought you to your limits, and then I supplied. I brought you to the end of your water, and I brought it out of a rock. I brought you to the end of a food, and then I brought it from heaven. Something nobody has ever, you've never seen it before. It was a completely new innovation. God brings manna to them, and he said, I did it for one reason, and that is to teach you humility, to humble you and remind you that you are limited and I am limitless. So God brought his people through in order to teach them humility. But humility's fruit is not just noticeable or evident in our relationships with God. Humility's fruit is really evident in each and every one of our relationships. No matter, you think about that kind of scope of the relationships you have. You think about the various roles that you play in those relationships. You know what I mean? Like, you're either a husband, or you're a wife, or you're a friend, or you're a parent, or you're a boss, or you're an employee. Humility brings fruit in every one of those kinds of relationships. You could call humility a kind of relational or social silicon. Social silicon. In other words, it smooths and keeps all of the working parts and dynamics of relationship from getting friction, so they flow smoothly. I have a couple of older light trail bikes hanging in my garage, and we don't use these bikes often because they're the best on sort of light trail or whatever. And we actually bought them years ago to use them in Sun River, where we go every summer, because there's like over 30 miles of bike trails. And I can say for sure, and it's pretty true for me, but I know it's true for my wife, she rides that bike one time a year when we go to Sun River. But when you get ready to get on the bike trail, you want a bike that's working right? So what I have to do every year is pull that baby down off those hooks on my ceiling, and I get that little bottle of silicone lubricant that the bike shop gave me, and I spray all of the gears and all the shifters and the cables and all that. Why do I do that? So there's no friction, there's nothing that gets in the way, and everything is flowing and working smoothly. That's what humility is in your relationship with God and your relationship with one another. Humility's like that. Now, after last week, I got some questions about pride, because I told you that in order to generate a hunger for humility, we have to come to an honest confrontation, if you will, with our own pride. And I know some of you might sit there and think, well, I don't know how much humility I really need. I'm doing pretty well. I don't have a lot of pride. I don't know if I need that much humility. Remember, pride's number one trademark: deception. It usually is not seen in the one who's poisoned by it, right? And we're all, because of our human nature, we're all poisoned by it to some degree or another. So I got some questions last week about pride, and if there's ever a healthy pride. Maybe some of the rest of you were, asking that question as well. Well, is pride always bad? I mean, is there ever an appropriate pride? And the answer is yes. Saying, oh, good. Whew. Maybe I'm not so bad after all. Well, hold on. To be sure, pride is predominantly condemned in the Bible. However, there are a few instances where the Bible actually talks about pride in a healthy way or an appropriate way. Let me give you a couple examples. In Deuteronomy 32, God is called Israel's pride. God is called Israel's pride. And over in Isaiah 60, Israel is referred to, so the people of God are referred to as God's pride and joy, right? So it's important to recognize that pride in these instances does not refer to the self-exalting, self-absorbed, kind of self-deceiving pride that is sinful and is condemned in Scripture regularly. It's not talking about that kind of pride. Instead, it refers to the value and appreciation and loving admiration one person might have for another. So God is Israel's pride, and Israel is God's pride in that way. For instance, we see Paul expressing his pride in the churches that he planted, okay? We see him expressing pride, and that pride in those churches, though, is rooted in God's grace and God's willingness to enable those churches to take root and to begin to grow. And his pride is rooted in God's gifting of him and his empowerment, the ability to empower those churches to grow. So Paul is not taking pride at that point in his own ability as a church planter, but in God's ability. That's the big difference. Not always easy for us to discern where our motive is sometimes, but Paul is taking pride not in his own ability, but in God's ability to work in and through his weaknesses. His boasting was an expression of gratitude for what God has done. You see, appropriate pride, let's call it, appropriate pride, always esteems, here's how we can differentiate. Appropriate pride always esteems and promotes God. Appropriate pride always esteems and promotes God, or it esteems and promotes others. You're lifting others up, okay? Improper pride, sinful pride, only esteems self, only draws attention and promotes self. So, let's apply this. Let me ask you a question. So, is it appropriate to be proud of your kids? Or to be proud of your work? Proud of your accomplishments? Yes, as long as you're mindful that God is the source of all of it, not you. Just don't forget God. Remember, that was the big mistake the big risk that God was warning the people of Israel. You go into the land of Israel, and all these things are going to be awesome, and you're going to have all this wealth, and you're going to have all these fine houses, and you're going to have all this food, and then you're going to forget me. You're going to forget the blesser because you're going to be so preoccupied with the blessing. Just don't forget God. Paul argues in Acts 17, look at this text with me. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands, and he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life, breath, and everything else. In him we live and move and have our being. That means anything great, anything cool, anything awesome in your life, it's not about you. Don't forget God. So be proud of what God, of God and what he has enabled you or your kids or your church or your business to accomplish. Boast in God and his accomplishments through you. So when you tell your kids you're proud of them, verbalize it in a way that anchors their accomplishments and God's work in and around them. Don't let them. Help them remember it's not about them. You're awesome. God made you awesome. Something like that. You're awesome. Isn't it awesome how God is working through you? What about the gifting, the skill? Your ability in that is so awesome. God was at the top of his game when he made you in that. Something like that. You're not going to get corny with it, but the point is, pay attention when you're encouraging and lifting and being proud of your kids. Pay attention to what you're saying to make sure it's not lifting you just a little. See, that's why I say sometimes it's hard to discern. Pay attention. Is this lifting me, or am I in this mindset, mindfulness and awareness of what God has done in and through my child? Am I able to encourage them and compliment them and build them up? And the whole time, there's nothing in me going, I had a piece of that. I had a little piece of that. Chip off the old block, or whatever, okay? Now, is that clear? Clear as mud? Clear? Okay. Related to healthy pride also is the idea of healthy confidence. Healthy confidence. I had one of our HSM students last week come up to me after the service, and I was so impressed because it was an excellent question. What's the difference between confidence and pride? What's the difference? It's a great question because often things like confidence, drive, passion, a desire for achievement, that can be mislabeled as pride. But if you display things like confidence, drive, and passion, being mindful that God's the ultimate source of it, being mindful, not forgetting, being mindful God is the source of it, and you glorify him with those things rather than yourself, then that's appropriate. That's confidence. Paul talks about this actually over in the 3rd chapter of 2 Corinthians. He's talking about how proud he is of the Corinthian believers and some of their traction spiritually and their growth. And he says, such confidence we have through Christ before God. Not that we are competent in ourselves to claim anything for ourselves, but our competence comes from God. See, that's the posture of heart we have to seek to cultivate in our lives. He's saying, I'm mindful of who've made all this possible. I'm mindful. So always keep in mind, appropriate pride, appropriate confidence always esteems and promotes God or others, but improper pride only esteems and draws attention and lifts self. So, the old saying, it ain't bragging if you can do it. Not true. That's a lie. Not true. It isn't really, bragging if you can do it. It's bragging, and it's boastful, and it's arrogant, and it's prideful if you're trying to esteem or draw attention or promote self. It's sinful and poisonous for you if you're glorifying self rather than God who gave you all the ability to do it. Now, the reason God is so seriously opposed to pride is because pride poisons and destroys everything it touches. Please, I know I've said this before. I'm going to say it again today. I'm going to say it again next week. Pride poisons and destroys everything it touches. It destroys the prideful person. it destroys his or her relationships, and it works to wreck everything beautiful and good in God's creation. Pride, poison. I want to show you a real-life example and a real-life illustration of how destructive and poisonous pride is. If you have your Bibles, look with me in the history books of Israel. In 1 Kings chapter 12, history of Israel. These are the actual accounts of what happened. Real life story, okay? Not fiction, not fairy tale. This is a real life story. Let me set the stage for you. So first 3 kings of Israel were who? Saul, David, and Solomon. Saul, David, and Solomon. So here's one broad way to remember the kind of the tone of each of their rule. Saul, no heart for God. Saul, no heart. David, whole heart. Solomon, half heart. Saul, no heart. David, whole heart. Solomon, half heart. Why half heart for God? He started out great, didn't he? Started out awesome. And then he fell prey to what God warned the people of Israel about last week. He forgot God, and he polluted his reign with multiple wives and foreign wives and pagan worship and all the rest. And towards the end of it, he was in the tank spiritually. So half heart, all right? Now Rehoboam, who this story is about, Rehoboam, what did his buddies nickname him? Rehoboam. How do you nickname Reho? What do we call him? I don't know. That's a big name. But I'm going to say it 150 times today. Rehoboam was the son of and the successor of Solomon. So Solomon starts out well, he ends poorly. Rehoboam picks up where Solomon leaves off. Most argue that he was about 50 years old when he took the throne. And this story takes place right at the beginning of his reign. So Solomon now God has actually placed a judgment on Solomon and said because of his turning from him, he's going to take the kingdom from him. But he said, I'm not going to take it from you, Solomon, but I'm going to rip it out of the hands of your son. Now you got to hold on to that reality right there, because that's a whole other therapy session about pride in terms of generational impact. All right, so Rehoboam, let's read first one. Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had gone there to make him king. Verse 2, when Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard this, he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon after he rebelled. So he tried to lead a rebellion against Solomon, and it didn't work out, so he pieced out and went to Egypt for a bit. So now that Solomon's gone and there's a changeover in leadership, Jeroboam hears about it, he's going to come back. So they sent for Jeroboam, verse 3, and he and the whole assembly of Israel went to Rehoboam and said to him, your father put a heavy yoke on us. So he's speaking for the people of Israel. Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. Lighten the load, and we will serve you. With the intention area is with loyalty and whole heart. Rehoboam, verse 5, answered, go away for 3 days and come back to me. So, verse 6, then King Rehoboam consulted the elders, notice, who had served under his father Solomon during his lifetime. And he asked them, how would you advise me to answer these people? Now, I give Rehoboam credit here for consulting input, okay? If there's any glimpse of humility in Rehoboam, this is it. He seeks some input. All right? These guys served his father. They were intricately familiar with Solomon's policies, which were harsh and heavy on the people. Part of me wonders if Rehoboam went and asked them because he knew how they counseled Solomon, so he had a pretty good idea of what they would say to him. You ever go talk to somebody because you're pretty sure what they're going to tell you? He figured they advised Dad to be a tough taskmaster, and so they'll advise the same to me. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't say. I'm just guessing. But at least he seeks input, so let's give him credit for that. Now, look what's next. Verse 7. They replied, here's what the elder said. If today you will be a, notice, servant to these people. He's going to be king. But if you will be a servant to these people, keep that in mind, okay? That's critical. And serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants. Did you hear what they're asking Rehoboam to do? Remember our definition of humility last week? Humility is dependence on God that generates confidence and strength that is used in service to others. Okay? They're asking Rehoboam, would you please lead with humility? They don't say the word, but that's the virtue they're asking Rehoboam to practice. And notice how they explain the fruit of humility to Rehoboam. If you lead with humility, notice, if you treat these people with humility, they'll serve you forever. If you serve them, if you're kind to them, if you're gracious and compassionate, they're going to serve you forever. Treat them with humility, Rehoboam, and you will enjoy their favor, their support, and their allegiance. That's humility. Rehoboam, if you will just lift them, they will lift you. That's counterintuitive for a leader. Notice what he does. Notice what Rehoboam does. Rehoboam rejected the advice of the elders. Instead, he consulted the young men he had grown up with. Don't get the answer you want from dad? You go ask mom. The young men who had grown up with him and were serving him. So he goes and asks his bros. He goes and asks his buddies. Verse 9, he asked them, what's your advice? How would you answer the people who say to me, lighten the yoke your fathers put on us? The young men who had grown up with him, notice your text, have replied, these people have said to you, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter. Now tell them this, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid a heavy yoke, I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions. 3 days later, Jeroboam and all the people returned to Rehoboam. As the king had said, come back to me in 3 days. Verse 13, the king answered the people harshly, rejecting the advice given him by the elders. He followed the advice of the young men and said, my father made your yoke heavy. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions. So the king did not listen to the people. He did not listen to the people, for this turn of events was from the Lord to fulfill what the Lord had spoken to Jeroboam, son of Nebat, through Ahiah the Shilonite. So the writer here is letting us know at that point that this was all a fulfillment now of a divinely announced punishment on Solomon for the pride he had demonstrated in his earlier years of reigning, okay? Remember God's warning about pride last week. When the splendor of Solomon's kingdom, you see, grew extravagant, he forgot God. He allowed the worship of pagan gods and didn't walk with God, didn't keep his commands or statutes. So God was going to rip the kingdom from Solomon's son and divide it up. Notice how all this plays out, verse 16. When all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, they answered the king. Now here's what the people said. Check this out. What share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, Israel. Look after your own house, David. So the Israelites went home. But as for the Israelites who were living in the towns of Judah, Rehoboam still ruled over them. King Rehoboam sent out Adoniram, who was in charge of forced labor, but all Israel stoned him to death. King Rehoboam, however, managed to get into his chariot and escape to Jerusalem. So Israel had been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. We see in this story, friends, so many different poisonous fingers of pride. Disastrous, destructive impacts. I want to look at a few of them. Number one, pride begets pride. Rehoboam's prideful actions flowed out of Solomon's prideful actions. The apple didn't fall too far from the tree, like father, like son. As I said, Solomon started out great, but when all the blessings came, Solomon began to worship the blessings rather than the blesser. So easy to do. And all the good in his life preoccupied him, and he forgot God. So easy. Rehoboam was no doubt shaped by that role model. It's like sins of the father stuff. Sins of the fathers being repeated. That's powerful. I want you to stop and think about this. Your pride today impacts your kids tomorrow. That's reason I could stop there and pray and we could go home. And that's a full plate, because that's above anything else is a call for us to begin to cultivate humility and be thinking clearly about it. A lifestyle of pride in one generation gives way to lifestyles of pride in the next generation. So friends, pride is nothing to be messing with, tolerating in your life. Notice how pride poisons your hearing. Pride does not listen. Pride does not listen. That's the second destructive force. Rehoboam rejected the wise counsel of the elders, and instead he sought counsel from his like-minded friends. And in the end, he wasn't seeking honest input, as humility calls for. He was seeking agreement with his own opinion. He was finding somebody who would agree with him. You and I do this. You and I do this when we get bent about something, and we go and find somebody to chatter to about it, and we find the people who we're pretty sure will agree with us. And then we just kind of pile on. And then we walk away feeling pretty good about it. One of pride's most notable trademarks, friends, think about it, a refusal to listen. When you're prideful, you not only believe you're right, but you have an irresistible urge to make sure everyone around you knows it. So you don't really listen well when you're in conversation. You listen long enough so you can jump in and reply. Or you listen long have to make sure you can, step in and make sure they know, interrupt them. You have a problem interrupting people? This is one of the evidences of pride I notice in my own life. They'll be talking and I'll just blurt out something. It's like, I already know what you're going to say. I already know, or I have a better idea, or I have another idea, and I'll just. So I don't even listen until they're done. I just blurt it out. Just talk over them. See, pride is inability to listen. Closely related to poor listening is this next one. Number 3, pride considers one's own ideas as superior to others. Pride considers one's own ideas as superior to others. Rehoboam in this scene, he hears the pleas of the people. And he hears their rationale. He heard the advice and the rationale of the elders, who he knew had faithfully served his father, and who had seen the impact of his father's policies on the people. These elders gave him really good advice and advised him to respond with humility, knowing that it would evoke favor from the people. But Rehoboam was pridefully convinced that he knew better. And he went to find some folks who would agree with him. Pride forgets. Listen. Pride, when it raises its ugly head in us, it makes us forget that no one person sees the whole thing. No one perspective captures all dimensions of a given issue or a problem or conflict. Years ago, over the years, I should say, a couple different times in our board breakaways, I'll take a cardboard box and I'll put one of the words of that phrase on every side of the box. No one sees the whole thing. Okay? I write that on the box, write one word on the box, and I set it in the center of our board circle, and I ask everybody to put all of their observation skills to work and write down everything they notice about their perspective. So, well, it's a brown box, and it has a little part of a sticker on it, and there's a word, thing, or there's a word, no. So after they all do all their observation, then I say, now share with each other what you observed. And they all share, well, my box says no. So after a little bit of discussion, they realize everybody's seeing a little different word. Well, what is this word? It forms a phrase. What is this phrase? No one sees the whole thing. Profound lesson for each of us as leaders to realize none of us can do it on our own. None of us can see the whole thing. None of us is an expert. We're in this together. In fact, as we've tried to cultivate that sort of importance of team in our leadership over the years, now we'll hear things, people say, man, I'm glad we do this together. Or that's why we do this together. Somebody forgets some major thing, and we go, oh, man. And we say, well, that's why we do this together. Because somebody else saw that and pointed it out. Does that make sense? When you're locked into your own ideas, pride forgets there are different ways to look at something. There are different perspectives to consider. Here's a fourth way pride poisons and destroys. Pride poisons compassion. Think about our story. The whole assembly. These are Rehoboam's people. This is Israel. We're not talking about some pagan nation that they conquered. This is Israel. And they all went before Rehoboam and they cried out for relief. Can you imagine? Be merciful to us. Lighten our load, king, new king. We'll be loyal to you. Just lighten our load. They pleaded. And he's not moved to compassion in the least. Pride, you see, over time in us, spawns a calloused insensitivity toward fellow human beings. And pride prioritizes our own well-being while disregarding others' well-being. We prioritize self. Rehoboam could not have cared less for the suffering caused by his father's policies. If you ever sense yourself lacking compassion, friends, do a gut check. Check yourself. More often than not, a lack of compassion is born out of a prideful belief that the other person is not worthy of your help. The other person either brought this on themselves or is the cause of their own trouble and doesn't deserve compassion. Rehoboam took it a step further in our story. Not only did he not lighten their load, he made their load heavier. Not only did he say, okay, everything's going to stay the same, he's like, no, I'm going to turn it up a few clicks. Pride always feels a need to turn the knife or prove its own superiority. That's the fifth destructive impact. Pride is obsessed with proving its superiority. This is probably the most often recognized trademark when we think about arrogance or pride. This is probably the most often trademark or character that's called out. Obsessed with trying to prove you're better than somebody else. Faster, stronger, smarter. Rehoboam's advisors told Rehoboam to say, so, yeah, well, my little finger's thicker than my dad's waist. What? Where did that come from? I mean, he's just popping off now. Now he's just bragging. Now he's just talking smack while he's dishonoring his dad, mocking his dad. This pride expression can be born out of a godless sort of disregard for fellow human beings. It can be born out of that. But please realize, this one, obsessed with proving its superiority, this one is a favorite of those who are compensating for insecurity in their lives. Remember what I said before, the bigger the little boy, the more puffed up the man outside is, right? Because you're protecting that little boy. They're obsessed with doing all they can to put others down so it lifts them up, right? The insecurity they feel is numbed by the security they fake. The insecurity they feel is numbed by the security they fake. Finally, let me show you one last destructive impact of pride out of this story. Number 6, pride divides and causes conflict. Pride always divides and causes friction and conflict. Verse 16 in our story today essentially says that the people respond, everyone for himself. Back to your tents. We got no part in this. We got no allegiance. We got no loyalty. We're on our own. Everybody for himself. This is why the New Testament writers emphasize humility so often within the young churches and the young church communities in the New Testament. Humility is pro-social. Humility creates intimacy. Humility bonds relationships together. But pride always destroys. Pride separates. Pride divides a wedge. Pride always lifts itself and pushes others down, so people don't even want to be around you. This is what happened with the nation of Israel. The 10 of the 12 tribes rallied around Jeroboam against Rehoboam. So Rehoboam loses 10 out of the 12 tribes. He loses. His servant lost his life. So he loses his leadership. There's life that's lost. There's relationships was lost. It's interesting, this fragmenting of the kingdom of Israel right at this point, this splitting of the kingdom of Israel right at this point, remains that way for the rest of time until each of them individually are conquered by pagan nations. This is the beginning of the end for Israel. And it's all born out of pride. These are some devastating, destructive impacts, friends. Pride is so costly. So much loss. I want to read for you one final illustration. This is a final illustration. It's out of the book of Daniel. You don't need to turn there. Let me just tell you about it, and I'll read you the key pieces. This is the story of Nebuchadnezzar. Some of you know him. We're familiar with him. Daniel 4. He has a disturbing dream, and he calls Daniel in to interpret it. It's a dream that's full of judgment on Nebuchadnezzar for his disregard for God and his arrogant, prideful posture towards people. And Daniel basically comes to him and tells him what the dream means, and then he basically says, look, I got some advice for you, he says to Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel says, Your Majesty, be pleased to accept my advice. Renounce your sins by doing what is right, and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed. It may be then that your prosperity will continue. In other words, about face, buddy. But notice what happens. Let me just read it to you. It's profound. Verse 28. All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. 12 months later, as the king was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, he said, "Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" Can you believe this guy? Nobody's hanging out with him unless you're paid. You're on the payroll, you're hanging out with him. But otherwise, he has no friends. Even as the words were on his lips, a voice came from heaven. "This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. You will be driven away from people, and you will live with wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox. 7 times will pass, 7 years will pass for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes." Immediately, what had been said about Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from the people. He ate grass like an ox. His body was drenched with dew from heaven until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle. So he's got dreadlocks now or something. I don't know. And his nails were like the claws of a bird. At the end of that time, Nebuchadnezzar said, "I raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. At the same time that my sanity was restored, my honor and splendor were returned to me for the glory of my kingdom. My advisors and nobles sought me out." You see what's happening? Humility is attractive. "They sought me out, and I was restored to my throne and became even greater than before, because when you humble yourself, he will lift you up. Now I, King Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right and all his ways are just." And notice this last line he says, "And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble." Nebuchadnezzar concludes this story with a reminder to us, friends, of the core theme of the Bible when it comes to pride and humility. If you exalt yourself, he has promised to humble you. Please hear that. It's no joke. You exalt yourself, he promises to humble you. But if you humble yourself, he promises to lift you up. I had some stickers made for our series. I want to give you some today on your way out. I've got some folks at the doors who are going to be handing these out. Take 1, 2, 3. Here's what I want you to do. Find the person who you think is most prideful in your life and have them put these on. No. You're going to take this sticker and you're going to put it on your water bottle or your mirror at home or wherever you want. Because here's what I want you to see. Put that slide up that has the humility sticker on it. We've had this designed just for this series because this reflects the theme of Scripture's key and core idea about humility. You notice the I is bowed down to the T or the cross. Daily dependence on God. Remember, that's where humility starts. And the Bible says, when you humble yourself before God, he will lift you up. The U's lifted up. This is your reminder, friends. Don't give it to the prideful people in your life unless it's you. Put it on, I've got this on my computer. Put it somewhere where every day you're reminded. So God can begin to awaken your awareness of the ways that pride has taken root. And we all have those. We're asking God to tune our eyes into that. It's not a fun process, but as we come to awareness of that, we're learning how to begin to cultivate pride and cultivate humility and practice humility in our lives, and we'll be talking very specifically about that in the weeks ahead. All right? So on your way out, grab a sticker or 2 or 3, whatever you need. Give them to your kids. Plaster them everywhere. And let's generate some humility together, shall we? Lord Jesus, you're kind to us. Thanks for your love. Thanks for your goodness to us, and particularly for your word, your truth, which is that mirror that we look into our lives, and that way that you help us recognize and see things in our lives we couldn't see before. Thanks for awakening us to ways that we're missing out in life by practicing pride. And Lord, continue to teach us what humility looks like and how we can begin to practice that in our lives, and then find the fulfillment and the richness of what it means to be daily dependent on you, and to use the confidence and strength and all the health that you build into us in service of others to lift them up. We love you. In your name, amen.